Hello, travelers. Welcome back to Death Kiss Traveler, the podcast where we take places built for joy, yank open the maintenance door, and find out what's been hiding behind the flashing lights. I'm Marissa, your morbidly curious host, and your guide for tonight's little field trip into the dark history side of family fun. I am changing my podcast just a little and adding me to it. I love telling you a good story and I love writing these stories, but I feel like my podcast is lacking my personality. So I hope you like this little change. Let me know in the comments if you like just a storytelling version or if you like the version with a little personality. And before we get started, I just want to say if you're listening to this episode while walking alone at night, first of all, that is a bold choice. But second of all, maybe don't. Because tonight we're stepping into a place that doesn't just look abandoned, it feels abandoned. You know, that special kind of silence that isn't peaceful, just watchful, like the air is waiting for you to make a mistake. Yeah, that ghostly kind. We're talking about Spree Park, Berlin's infamous amusement park ruin, where the ride stopped, the paint peeled, the trees moved in, and the stories never left. Now, quick reality check before we light our flashlights and pretend we're brave. The ghost stories are urban mythology, not official records, not proven. But here's what is real. Abandoned amusement parks are dangerous. And Spree Park is the kind of place where your imagination can hurt you almost as fast as the environment can. And I must add, if you love episodes like this, theme parks, creepy histories, disasters, strange legends, all of it, come hang out with me between episodes. Follow the show on social media, TikTok, Instagram, for photos, behind the scenes research, and the extra details that don't always make it into my audio podcast. You can find the links in the show notes or visit Death Kiss Traveler Podcast. And if you're the kind of person who likes being early, turn on notifications so you don't miss the next drop of my podcast. And if you're enjoying this show, you already know the drill. Follow, subscribe, leave a quick rating or review, and send this episode to a family or friend. I really appreciate the support. All right, now take a breath and keep your hands inside the ride at all times, because this Spree Park doesn't need to be open to feel like something's still running. Let's go. In the late 1960s, while the Cold War was slicing Europe cleanly in half and tension hung thicker than cigarette smoke in an East Berlin cafe, the German Democratic Republic, the GDR, East Germany, decided it needed something radical. Not a new weapon, not a border wall, an amusement park. Yes, the East Germany needed an amusement park. And on October 4th, 1969, as the GDR celebrated its 20th anniversary, it unveiled something almost surreal. Culture Park Planterwald. I don't speak German, so I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly. Culture Park was later known as Spree Park Berlin. It was hidden deep in the Planterwald forest and hugging the slow, looping bends of the River Spree. This wasn't just another fairground. It was the only permanent amusement park in the entire GDR. In a country where travel was restricted, entertainment was curated, and spontaneity was discouraged, this park was a sanctioned escape hatch. A place where joy was allowed. Yes, it was scheduled, supervised joy, but joy nonetheless. And the name mattered. Culture Park. Not a capitalist fun fair, not a profit machine, a cultural space. Here, socialism met cotton candy. The park buzzed with rides, food stalls, concerts, dance events, children's attractions. Laughter echoed through a society better known for order and control. For East German families, this is where memories were made. where kids begged for one more ride and adults pretended, just for a moment, that the world beyond the gates didn't exist. Towering over it all was the park's crown jewel, the Ferris wheel. It was a massive steel Ferris wheel that rose above the treetops, visible for miles. It became an instant landmark, a symbol of simple pleasure in a complicated world. Riders floated above the forest, watching the city roll by below, experienced something beautifully ordinary that felt almost extraordinary in the context of the Cold War. Through the 1970s and the 1980s, Culture Park Planterwald thrived. Hundreds of thousands of visitors poured in every year. At its peak, it hit 1.7 million people annually. That is a staggering number for what and where it was. For many families, a day at the park became tradition. Carousel music, sticky fingers, spinning rides, and a brief sense of freedom framed by everyday socialist life. Then came 1989, just weeks before the Berlin Wall would fall and the world would completely change. The park's Ferris wheel was rebuilt and expanded for the GDR's 40th anniversary. Bigger, brighter, nearly 45 meters tall, carrying 40 gondolas. A bold declaration of permanence and optimism. That summer, the lights still spun, laughter still rang out, but history was already moving faster than the rides. Within weeks, East and West Berlin would reunite, borders would dissolve, and Culture Park Planterwald, once a proud state-run symbol of socialist leisure, would suddenly find itself stranded in a brand new world, one it was never designed to survive. And that's where the story really begins. There's your quick history lesson for the day. You didn't know this podcast was going to come with a history lesson, huh? When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, it didn't just reunite a country, it detonated an entirely new reality place like Culture Park Planterwald. Almost overnight, the world the park had been built for simply vanished. East Germany was gone. State funding was gone, and the rules of survival had changed. In the early 1990s, the once state-run amusement park was privatized, handed over to a private ownership in a newly capitalist Germany. Norbert White was a carnival operator from West Germany who took control of Spree Park during its privatized era. White believed he could succeed where others failed. He envisioned Spree Park not as a relic of the GDR, but as a serious competitor in the European amusement industry. What he inherited, however, was a financial trap. To stay afloat, White took on massive loans, reportedly amounting to tens of millions of euros. Attendance continued to fall, but his spending didn't stop. The park was running not on profit, but on borrowed time. With that shift came a new name, Spree Park Berlin, and a new identity as it was expected to live up to. No longer a socialist cultural park meant to serve the people, Spree Park now had to compete, turn profit, and survive in a free market it had never been designed for. To keep up with the flashy Western-style amusement parks flooding reunified Germany, Spree Park underwent a dramatic transformation. The familiar open access to the grounds, once free to enter with rides paid for individually, were reconstructed into a closed amusement park with paid entrance fees. A move that quietly alienated many longtime Eastern Berlin visitors who had grown up with a very different relationship to the park. Inside the gates, change was everywhere. New roller coasters rose where simple rides once stood. Water attractions were added to match modern thrill park expectations. Entire themed areas appeared. A new Wild West town, complete with saloon facades. An English village designed to evoke a fantasy version of Europe that many former East Germans had only recently been allowed to see in real life. On the surface, it looked like progress. The gates to the new and improved theme park finally opened on April 4th, 1992. And for a brief moment, it worked. In the early years after reunification, Spree Park still attracted crowds, up to 1.5 million visitors a year. Families were curious, tourists wandered in, nostalgia mixed with novelty. The park truly felt like it might successfully reinvent itself. But beneath the colorful paint and new steel rides, the cracks were already forming. Spree Park was trapped between two worlds. It wasn't modern enough to rival massive Western theme parks with corporate backing, places like Europa Park or Disneyland Paris. But it also wasn't the familiar, affordable community space it had once been. The maintenance costs skyrocketed, new attractions were expensive to operate, aging infrastructure from the GDR era required constant repair, and the competition in the reunified Berlin entertainment scene was fierce. Where once the park drew in nearly 2 million visitors a year, after 1997, the attendance numbers gradually dwindled to about 500,000, a steady decline. Behind the scenes, a financial pressure mounted. The costs outpaced income, and the dream of a successful post-wall rebirth quietly collapsed. The park's operating costs were staggering. Rides needed constant maintenance, safety inspections grew stricter, and the park couldn't keep up. Insurance costs ballooned. Electricity, staffing, and repairs devoured the income faster than the ticket sales could replace it. But White kept adding new attractions to modernize the park, but that only increased the burden. Then in 2001, the inevitable arrived. Park GmbH, the company operating the park, officially declared insolvency. For those that live in the US, it's basically bankruptcy. And like that, the gates closed. The rides shut down, the music stopped. What once had echoed with laughter, carnival sounds, and spinning lights fell silent almost overnight. Attractions were left standing. Props remained where they were, and nature began creeping back in. Vines, rust, and decay slowly swallowing what capitalism and history had already finished off. Spree Park didn't fade away gently. It was abandoned, frozen in time, a haunting monument to a place caught between political systems, economic realities, and broken promises. And what came next was even stranger. By 2002, Norbert White didn't just leave Berlin, he escaped it. And he didn't go alone. He took his family and 6 of Spree Park's rides. Because when your amusement park empire collapses, obviously the next move is to start another theme park in Peru. A friend of a friend told him that Lima, Peru was ripe for a comeback story. And if there's one thing history has taught us, it's that friend of a friend advice has never led anyone into a pit of consequences, right? From the start, everything went wrong. Paperwork, money, logistics, reality. And White wasn't well. His heart was failing, his body struggling to keep pace with a dream that was already rotting at the edges. And then 2003 hit. Because in 2003, Norbert White wasn't just rebuilding a theme park dream in Peru. He was trying to ship something else back to Germany with his son Marcel. Authorities caught him attempting to smuggle 181 kilos of cocaine, worth around 15 million euros. In today's money, that's about 24.5 million euros. And can you guess where they were hiding? 181 kilos of cocaine were hiding inside rides. Most of it was hiding inside a ride called the Flying Carpet. Let that sink in. A carnival ride repurposed as a drug mule. He thought he was a genius. Obviously, it didn't work. A magic carpet that wasn't flying anywhere except for straight into the courtroom. White was sentenced to 8 years, but he served 4. And this is where our story gets a little darker. Because Norbert got out. His son Marcel didn't. Norbert had the fortune of being arrested in Germany. His son Marcel had the misfortune of being arrested in Peru, where prison isn't a sentence so much as a slow-motion disappearance. Marcel would spend 13 years in Lima Sarita's Colonia prison before finally being transferred back to Berlin in 2016. White later admitted that what everyone already knew, it was his fault. He said his son had nothing to do with it. He said his son wouldn't have touched those people, wouldn't have gotten involved if it was not for him. White had gotten involved with the Peruvian mafia. And the family, they didn't survive Peru. Norbert was married to a woman named Pia, and she said she would never forgive him. Their relationship ended there, like the dream did, stranded on the wrong continent, surrounded by debt and consequences. Now, while all of this was happening overseas, Spree Park back in Berlin was becoming something else entirely. Not an amusement park, a tomb. The roller coasters rusted into skeletal loops. The water slide boats filled with leaves and dirt like little coffins waiting at the bottom of a stagnant river. Buildings were boarded up, rides sat abandoned and silent. No screaming kids, no carnival music. Just birds, rats, and the slow, patient takeover of nature. And still, Norbert White never stopped talking like a man with a plan. Once a showman, always a showman, he said. Which sounds charming until you realize it can also mean once a con, always a con. Then in 2013 and 2014, Spree Park's story takes a turn so bizarre, it sounds like another urban legend. In July of 2013, a Berlin concert promoter bid nearly 2.5 million euros for Spree Park at an auction. It was well above asking price, and the whole thing was abruptly withdrawn, pulled gone as if the park itself didn't want to be sold in daylight. The other bidder was a state-backed property fund tied to the city, which raises a question that Berlin will never answer plainly. If the city wanted it, why did it let it go to auction at all? By March of 2014, the city buys Spree Park back in a deal worth just over 2 million euros. Only after the creditors agree to swallow their losses. And yes, at some point before that, the park had apparently been listed on eBay, which is either the funniest detail in this entire tragedy or the bleakest. I'm going to try and find that eBay listing and post it on my social media. On April 30th of 2014, the city officially takes over. The Whites and their entourage move out. Norbert had been living in a caravan on site, and his daughter Sabrina would give weekend tours like the ruins were a museum of bad decisions. But investors were still spooked. Why? Because the lease attached to the land required it to remain an amusement or recreation park until 2061. Now we have to go back in time. Before the paint peeled at Spree Park, before the Ferris wheel froze in the trees of Planterwald, Norbert White already had blood on his hands. And this part is wild because I've actually talked about this story before, not knowing what came after. Turns out that the Spree Park collapse wasn't the beginning of White's legend. It was just a later chapter. Because in the summer of 1981, White wasn't just the Spree Park guy. He was a working carnival operator, one of those men who lived by the fairground calendar. Set up, tear down, move on. Steel, grease, lights, money, repeat. And on a warm August night at the Hamburger Dom, one of Germany's oldest and biggest fairgrounds, everything looked normal from the outside. That familiar carnival scene. Laughter floating through the air, the smell of fried food, bulbs flashing like 1,000 tiny promises. Rides rocked against the night sky. People came there to escape their lives for a few hours. White owned a looping ride called the Catapult. It had a problem, something mechanical, something we need to fix before tomorrow. So late that night, when the crowds were still out, White climbed into a crane to make repairs. The plan was basic, practical, routine. Fix the issue, keep the ride running, protect the income. But carnivals are built on machines, and machines don't always care about plans. Somewhere in the movement, somewhere between intention and momentum, the crane's heavy boom swung wider than it should have, and instead of stopping it safely, it kept going, right into the ride next to it. A massive spinning enterprise ride called the Skylab. A full attraction of moving arms and gondolas carrying people who had no idea their night was about to split open. Literally. The boom hit the Skylab, and it didn't just tap it, it tore it. Metal slammed into metal. Spinning didn't stop cleanly, it fought the impact. Like an animal trying to keep moving even when it's being torn apart. Gondolas crumpled, belts snapped, bodies were thrown. The music, the lights, the laughter, gone in a blink, replaced by the sound that always comes next. Screaming. Witnesses described absolute chaos. People launched from their seats, others crushed in the wreckage. It wasn't a ride malfunction. It wasn't a minor accident. It was a collision. A fairground car crash in mid-air. When it finally stopped, 7 people were dead. 15 more were seriously injured. And at the time, it became the worst carnival accident in post-war German history. Now imagine standing there afterward. The lights are still blinking because no one thought to turn them off. The smell of food still hangs in the air like a cruel joke. And the ride, something built to spin joy out of steel, now looks like a mangled sculpture of panic. For White, this accident didn't just stain his career, it branded him. Later, he would call it the worst thing he's ever experienced in his life. And regardless of what you think of him, there's kind of a nightmare that comes from watching something you own and operate become the instrument of mass death. Legally, White was prosecuted for negligent homicide. And even beyond the courtroom, the industry itself punished him. After the crash, many fairgrounds wouldn't give him placement anymore for any of his rides. It was professional exile. Not officially banned, but quietly shut out. The message was clear to him, spoken in contracts and refusals, not press statements. We don't want your rides here. So the White family did what carnival families do when the grounds turn against them. They kept moving. They traveled through Europe, Germany, Italy, wherever they could still work. Scraping out a living while dragging a tragedy behind them like a shadow you can't outrun. And for years, it looked like that would be the end of Norbert White's story. A grim final chapter, one terrible night, a fatal mistake in a career that never fully recovered. But history doesn't always end when we think it should. Because a decade later, after reunification, Berlin's Culture Park Planterwald, the only permanent amusement park in East Germany, needed private operators. And somehow, Norbert White was chosen. Either the people awarding the park didn't fully examine his past, or they did and decided it didn't matter. I honestly don't know, and I couldn't find the details of it. But that decision ripples through everything that came next. Because it links one night of twisted steel and dead bodies in Hamburg to the slow-motion ruin of Spree Park in Berlin. The same man who once stood in the aftermath of a catastrophic fairground collision would later try and keep an entire amusement park alive until desperation, debt, and crime swallowed up the whole thing. Okay, now back to 2001. When Spree Park shut its gates in 2001, it wasn't dismantled. It wasn't secured. It wasn't gently put to sleep like a beloved relic. Nope, it was just abandoned. Like someone turned off the lights mid-party and never came back. And what they left behind wasn't a cute little nostalgic graveyard. It was a sprawling industrial hazard disguised as a theme park. Heavy machinery, decaying structures, and infrastructure that was never meant to sit still and rot. Because here's the thing, amusement parks aren't built to rest. They're built to move. Steel attractions, roller coaster tracks, rotating arms, joints, gears, just sitting there naked in the weather. Rain pooled inside the metal tubing. Bearings seized, bolts loosened, rust didn't just show up, it moved in. Tracks warped, the platforms softened, staircases corroded, and the really evil part, a lot of it still looked safe. A ladder that seemed solid could fold under your weight. A handrail could snap like a breadstick. A ride car could shift because it's no longer balanced or locked the way it was when maintenance crew existed and the laws of physics were being supervised. And unlike a construction site, there were no signs, no warnings, no caution tape, just silence, which is honestly the scariest safety policy imaginable. Good luck. But the surface was only the beginning. Inside the buildings, electrical systems were left to decay like exposed nerves. Control panels sat open, wiring drooped from the walls and ceilings. In places, insulation peeled away, leaving cables accessible to anyone curious enough to touch the wrong thing. And underground was even worse. Service tunnels, drainage systems, maintenance pits never sealed properly. Over time, vegetation crept in and covered broken concrete, open shafts, sudden drop-offs. What looked like solid ground could be a trapdoor into darkness. Explorers later described areas where one careless step could mean falling into a technician's pit. Places never meant for wandering feet, only trained workers who knew exactly what they were looking for. As Spree Park's reputation grew, people broke in, not just to explore, but to loot. First was the copper wiring. It was ripped from the walls. Doors were torn off hinges. Windows were smashed out. Supports were weakened. Heavy objects were dragged around and left tipped, leaning or balanced in a special way that screams, "I will fall on the next person who walks past me." People did that on purpose. By the mid-2000s, the warnings started getting more explicit. Spree Park wasn't just forbidden, it was unsafe. A demolition site without barricades, inspections, or emergency planning. But the people kept coming. And then another danger started building. Quietly, patiently, fire. Abandonment is basically a fire spell. Think about it. You have dry wood from themed structures, overgrowth tangling through platforms and walls, trash buildup, tons of trash, broken glass everywhere, electrical systems buried inside rotting buildings, and trespassers wandering through it all like they're invincible. At Spree Park, fire wasn't a question of if, only when. And then it happened Sunday night, August 10th, 2014. Into the early hours of August 11th, flames erupted inside the closed grounds. Fire crews discovered two separate fires about 200 meters apart. The kind of detail that makes authorities use the word suspected arson and start speaking through clenched teeth. The blaze tore through the themed buildings and scenery sections described as old houses, and it spread fast. And when firefighters arrived, Spree Park did what it always does. It made everything harder. This place wasn't designed for emergency access. Paths were narrow. Vegetation was overgrown. Roads were blocked. Buildings were structurally unstable, meaning crews couldn't safely push inside. Hydrants, well, they were too far away or non-existent. The nearest ones were about 1.5 kilometers away. So they brought in boats and pumped water from the nearby Spree River. At the height of it, over 100 firefighters were deployed. They brought out the heavy equipment, breathing masks, everything for this nightmare. Smoke rose over Planterwald and drifted towards Berlin, like a signal flare. No civilians were hurt, mostly because the park was closed, but firefighters were working in a space that had been neglected for years, where anything could collapse and nothing was predictable. And within days, police were arresting suspects, 4 men, and 3 reportedly admitted to starting the fires. And that's when the illusion finally shattered, because from the outside, Spree Park still looked whimsical. Faded colors, familiar shapes, the ghost of fun still standing upright. It tricks your brain into thinking it's frozen in time. But inside the gates, gravity had been winning for years. Corrosion had been working overtime, and now the fire had officially joined the staff. After that blaze, the park couldn't be ignored anymore. Fires don't respect fences, smoke doesn't stay contained, and you can't keep sending emergency crews into rotting funhouses built of hazards. So the conversations got serious. Security tightened. The city started treating Spree Park less like a sad landmark and more of like what it had become, a liability, a trap, a theme park where the rides don't thrill you anymore. That year, the state of Berlin officially regained ownership of the site. We talked about it a minute ago. And the goal wasn't some warm, inspiring, bring back the magic moment. The goal was just containment. Stop the bleeding, structurally, legally, physically. Because abandoned amusement park sounds like a vibe until you remember it's also a compound full of collapsing steel, rotten wood, exposed wiring, and holes in the ground waiting to swallow somebody's ankle, and then the rest of them. For the first time since the gates closed, there was one authority responsible for what happened inside. That job ultimately landed with Grün Berlin, the state-owned company that manages major green spaces and redevelopment projects across the city. When they stepped in, their first priority wasn't nostalgia, it wasn't reopening rides, it wasn't tourism, it was risk. So the experts came in. Engineers, safety inspectors, environmental assessments, the people whose job is to walk into a place like Spree Park and say calmly, yes, this can kill you. And what they found confirmed what locals and explorers already knew. The park wasn't sleeping, it was actively falling. Unstable structures, serious hazards, and parts that were beyond casual repair. Some areas were so unstable, they couldn't even barely be safely stabilized, meaning the park wasn't just a ruin, it was a ruin with mood swings. Now you might ask, why not just bulldoze it and move on? Because Spree Park had become culturally radioactive. It wasn't just property, it was a memory for people. A symbol of reunification, optimism, private operator chaos. So the challenge wasn't erasing it, it was controlling it. And that's where Berlin made a very Berlin decision. If people are going to sneak in anyway, we're going to make the ruin official. Because illegal exploring meant injuries, emergency callouts, fires, vandalism, and the city constantly reacting to chaos. The solution was to flip the script. Turn uncontrolled trespassing into supervised access. Structured, limited, guided. So the guided tour era took shape, not as preservation, but as damage control. Routes were planned like you'd plan a safety path through a minefield. Approved paths only. Unsafe areas were blocked off. Conditions constantly reevaluated, and the site treated less like an attraction and more like a fragile environment that might drop a ceiling on you if you speak too loudly. Think about it as a controlled containment operation performed on a haunted patient that refuses to die. Tours stayed limited because the city's message was basically, you may visit the ghost, you may not touch the ghost. And if you wander off, the ghost will absolutely take you. But these tours weren't just about safety, they were also about narrative control. Because once Berlin owned the park again, Berlin could decide what Spree Park meant. And that's how Spree Park transformed quietly from an uncontrolled danger zone into something new, a managed ruin. And as of today, you can still take a private tour there. And now I need to go to Berlin. Spree Park feels uniquely Berlin. But it's not the only place where laughter turns to rust. Around the world, amusement parks rise and fall like a roller coaster. And when they die, they don't vanish politely. They linger. All that steel and concrete and fake happiness left behind like a smile that won't relax. Think of it as a global phenomenon of the abandoned amusement park. A place that once promised joy, now reduced to nostalgia, danger, and urban legend. Let's take a quick tour of the graveyard. Our first stop we talked about a couple weeks ago is Six Flags in New Orleans. This one didn't die from mismanagement, at least not primarily. It got hit by nature like a wrecking ball. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, the park suffered massive damage and never reopened. Six Flags ultimately declared it a total loss and has sat abandoned, turning into a magnet for explorers and photographers chasing that post-apocalyptic theme park vibe. If you haven't, go listen to that podcast. It's a wild story. Next is Nara Dreamland. I've wanted to do a whole episode on Japan's Almost Disney. It opened in 1961 and it ran for decades, but started declining hard as bigger, shinier competition like Tokyo Disneyland and later Tokyo Disney Sea pulled all of the crowds away. Attendance fell, money dried up, and it closed in 2006. Then it entered its ghost phase, a long stretch of abandonment that attracted vandals and paranormal investigators until demolition began in the late 2016. It finished in 2017, and it's the classic fairy tale ending. If the fairy tale ends with bulldozers and silence, and more like Spree Park, Joyland Amusement Park, this one didn't just get wiped out overnight, it just aged badly. Competition costs climbed, the rides got outdated, the park closed permanently in 2006, and what followed was the familiar afterlife. Vandalism, looting, damage, and a site that became more hazardous with every season it sat unattended. At some point, it stops being a sad old park and starts being a place where you will get tetanus. And then if you want the darkest comparison point, Pripyat Amusement Park, it was supposed to open for May Day, May 1st, 1986. Then the Chernobyl disaster happened on April 26th, and the park's future died before it could even begin. There are stories it briefly ran for a short time after the accident, but that claim is disputed and not supported well. Either way, the image is iconic. The Ferris wheel is a symbol of celebration that never came. So what links all of these parks isn't geography, it's the pattern. A park thrives for generations and becomes part of a local memory. Then something shifts. Whether it be competition, economics, disaster, maintenance slips, safety degrades, money disappears, the gates close sometimes quietly, sometimes suddenly, and what's left behind becomes a hybrid of nostalgia, danger, and myth. But here's where Spree Park stands apart. Spree Park wasn't just a business failing, it was history whiplash. It was born in East Germany, operating under socialism. Then after reunification, it was thrown into capitalism like somebody shoved it onto a ride before the lap bar clicked. Its collapse wasn't just a park decline. It was privatization, cultural shifts, and one man's desperate gambles. Spree Park is a cautionary monument to what happens when history changes overnight and the wrong person gets their hands on the keys. And when amusement parks fall, they don't disappear. They rot. Then they tempt. Then they become dangerous. And somehow, against all logic, they become unforgettable. There has been talk of redoing the park or something similar with a new Ferris wheel, and I hope they do. Nobody wants to live next to an abandoned, run-down theme park. Actually, maybe I do. But as of now, go and tour Spree Park. Legally. But you might or might not want to after I tell you about the dark side of Spree Park. Long after Spree Park's gates closed, long after the last ticket was torn, and the laughter drained out of the paths like water, something else seemed to stay behind. Not workers, not music, something quieter. Something that didn't need electricity. Because abandonment doesn't just rot a place, it rewrites it. Over the years, Spree Park stopped being an old theme park and became a stage for urban mythology. Explorers didn't just leave with photos, they left with stories. Half jokes they told to sound brave, and half confessions they whispered when they thought nobody was recording. Before I go any further, none of this is verified history. There are no official records of hauntings. But listen, if you've ever been somewhere that used to be loud, now it's silent, you know how the mind starts filling in the gaps. Spree Park's Ferris wheel became the main character of those stories. Even after the motor died, it didn't always stay still. When the wind pushes through Plainterwald, that huge steel wheel shifted, slowly turning like a dead clock hand trying to remember what time it is. And at night, that movement didn't look like physics. It looked like intent. Explorers described the sound first, the wheel creaking and groaning in the dark, metal complaining with every gust, a low, dragging moan that carried across the trees. Some people swore it sounded like mourning, like the wheel was crying out for the millions of riders it once carried, or the ones it never got to. And then comes the other noises, the ones that mess with you. Neighbors and trespassers talk about the same thing. After sunset, when the park should be nothing but wind and leaves, something, somewhere, sounds like it's playing back the past. A faint, warped carnival melody drifting through the trees, like an old record player running out of battery, except there's no record player. The sound arises, falls, and moves, like it's circling the ruins, looking for an audience. And sometimes they say it isn't music, it's laughter. Not adult laughter, sharp, childlike giggles that appear to burst and then vanish. Too close, too sudden. Echoing off of steel supports and boarded up booths, it never lasts long enough to prove anything, just long enough to make your skin tighten. Then there's the mechanical undertone, Spree Park's own language. Clinks, creaks, the whisper of loose panels shaking, the grind of metal shifting somewhere you can't see. All of that has normal explanations. Metal expands and contracts, hollow structures amplify echoes, wind makes patterns, animals move through leaves. Your brain mislabels sounds when you're scared, but Spree Park is the kind of place where normal doesn't feel convincing. Because the silence isn't empty, it feels occupied. And that's where the legend of the White Lady comes in. Spree Park's most persistent ghost story. People claim that on certain nights, a pale woman in white can be seen near the Ferris wheel, drifting, searching, gliding in and out like a shadow. Depending on who's telling the story, she's either the spirit of a girl who died during construction or the phantom of someone lost to an accident during the park's operating years. There's no historical evidence of a death that matches either of those stories. The origin is murky, inconsistent, and probably born from someone's nerves turning a shape into a person, and the park doing what it does best, feeding the imagination. That's the point. Spree Park doesn't need a documented ghost to haunt you. Urban explorers described walking those cracked paths with a flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the dark, feeling the bark swallow the rest of the world behind them. They talk about footsteps that aren't theirs, always a few steps behind them, until you stop and turn and realize the path is empty. Some swear they heard movement above them, clinking along the Ferris wheel structure. One photographer described crouching near a ruined carousel, camera ready, when laughter rang out directly overhead, like a group of children playing tag in the branches. She said the park was dead silent, except for that sound. Another explorer told of a sudden, unnatural stillness. Then a burst of metal grinding and clattering, like rides moving on invisible motors. Not constant, not reliable, just enough to feel like the park had noticed him. And so many people have reported cold spots, sharp drops in temperature that don't match the air around them. The feeling of being watched from just beyond the edge of the flashlight beam. And the most unsettling part, all these stories come with rules. They get repeated like folklore, passed from one explorer to the next like a warning label. Never go alone. Never stay after dark. And if the park goes too quiet, leave. Because Spree Park doesn't just look abandoned at night, it sounds abandoned. And yet, it speaks. And whether it's ghosts, wind, wildlife, or your nervous system trying to survive in a place built from rust and memory, the result is the same. You walk out carrying something you didn't bring in. A fear that doesn't fade with daylight, and the creeping sense that the park isn't empty, it's waiting. And that's the story of Spree Park, where the rides don't run anymore, but the stories still do. If you ever find yourself in Berlin staring at that Ferris wheel through the trees, just remember, you might not be alone. So do me a favor, don't go alone. Don't hop the fence, and if you hear carnival music with no speakers in sight, leave immediately, like your life depends on it. I'm Marissa, and this is Death Kiss Traveler. Thank you for listening, so sleep tight, and I'll see you next week with a Dear Valentine's episode that you won't want to miss. I'll see you then. This podcast is produced by Sunkissed Traveler, the travel agency that takes the stress out of planning a vacation. Thinking of a Caribbean cruise, a Disney World vacation, or how about a trip to Berlin, Germany? Wherever you want to go, Sunkissed Traveler can help. Free vacation quote. Visit sun-kissedtraveler.com. See show notes for details.